Hello and welcome to another Teacher's Corner. I'm Teacher Kirby, and this episode we're going to be talking about the Temporal Defense Initiative reputation. So you can find it by clicking on your reputation tab, and here we go. So there are 6 tiers, as with all the reputations, and tier 1 you get a couple traits, and those are ground traits called temporal flux conditioning, which gives you a damage over time hazard and a damage over time ability and a hazard resistance. And this is passive. You also get miniaturized chrono capacitor. This reduces kit module recharge times and is passive. Also, or moving right along, we get for tier 2 we get a couple space traits, and these are temporal flux dissipators, which again gives you a damage over time ability and hazard resistance. Okay, and this gives you damage over time and hazard resistance. Then we have our chrono capacitor array, which can be quite useful if you're trying to make or to mitigate your bridge officer recharge times, because guess what? It reduces bridge officer recharge times. So if you want an alternative to Ox to Bat, this could be a integral part of reducing your bridge officer times. Moving right along for tier 3, we get the on ground again combat awareness, which gives damage against controlled targets. Then we get reprisal. When you are controlled, you gain crit severity for a short amount of time. For tier 4, back to space again, we get controlled countermeasures, which means you get plus damage against controlled targets. So if you're using a gravity well build, for example, then you could consider using this, although there's usually better things to go in that slot. Then you have counterstroke. When controlled, gain crit severity. Okay, and then we have our tier 5, which gives anti-time entanglement singularity. This gives a shrinking AoE damage hazard and slows and holds your foes. And you hear my cat is complaining, and apparently he doesn't like the anti-time entanglement singularity. Anyway, but this is a decent ability to have, especially on a build that has a bunch of EPG or exotic particle generators, because this is enhanced by exotic particle generators. So if you're running a science boat, definitely something you want to consider running and using on a regular basis. Just remember, it does have a 5-minute cooldown, and it is best on large foes that either don't move or are controlled at the time you put it out. Alright, moving right along, tier 6, as with all tier 6s, gives you a rank 2 of each of these abilities, and that gives you a 25% increase in their effectiveness, including our tier 5 anti-time entanglement singularity. Alright, moving right along. So for when we unlock tier 6, we of course get our vanity shield, our claim a fleet ship module, a retrain token, and our hourly project. Okay, and then we have for ground, we have our Temporal Defense Initiative Adaptable Combat Armor, and this gives a whole bunch of damage resistance to physical and kinetic energy, radiation, toxic fire, and cold damage. So this is a pretty good all around um, armor. It does give quite a bit to physical, kinetic, and energy damage. It gives a moderate or small amount to the other four. It does also give 60.1 maximum hit points, and it gives a little bit of willpower, which is resistance to ground control effects. It also gives plus 25% all damage for damage over time and hazard effects. So if you're throwing out a lot of science abilities on the ground that are hazards or damage over time effects, this could be a good armor for you. Alright, and then we also have our uh, personal shield for the Temporal Defense Initiative, and this gives us a little bit of Armor Expert, which improves our ground resistance. This also gives us a good amount of shield capacity, 308.7, with 10% bleed through, so about average, and gives us our normal rapidly regenerates after not taking damage for 3 seconds, and as well as a chance to knock down nearby foes when we take damage. It also has, which is different from others, has a reduces all energy damage to shields by 15%, which is different from other shields, and gives a chance to provide a 10% energy damage buff for 4 seconds when you take damage. So those are unique to this shield. Alright, and moving right along, we have our weapon. And because this is tier 6, we're going to have 2 weapons. The Chronoton dual pistols is the primary, so this is all you'll see until you unlock tier 6. The Polaron is the secondary energy type, and that will be unlocked upon reaching tier 6. So I'm only going to go over one because they're both identical with the exception of the energy type. Alright, and this does have our 2% bonus all damage because I am tier 6 in this reputation. Alright, so we have our rapid bolt setting, which gives us 38.4 anti-proton damage times 5, so that's 170.9 DPS. It also grants 1 Chronoton charge counter, which enhances the secondary attack and unlocks the tertiary attack with 7 charges. It also has a 5% chance to apply Chronoton stabilization to yourself for 60 seconds, which gives you plus 5% run speed and 3% shield resistance, and those effects stack up to 5 times. So basically you can get 15% shield resistance and up to 15%, or sorry, 5 times 25%, my mistake, 25% run speed. And for our secondary, we get an extra plus 10 repel and 5% chance for the Chronoton stabilization again, and that has a 4-second recharge. Alright, and same thing with the Polaron, the only difference is that it is Polaron. Alright, moving right along, we have our kit modules. This is a science character, so we see the science kit module, which is the anti-time, and I forgot before we move along to talk about the set bonuses of the ground set. So for our set bonuses, first of all, it does have a costume. The Temporal Battlesuit costume set is unlocked by accolade completion once all pieces of the set have been acquired. And our set powers, for our 2-piece set, we get the ability of Chronoton Acclamation. This is a passive ability. It gives plus 14.3% anti-proton damage. That is category 1. So it's really not a lot. and 14.3% polaron damage. It also gives a plus 25 anti-proton damage resistance rating, which is a moderate amount. For our set 3 bonus, we get Temporal Stasis. This is an active or clickable ability. It targets up to 4 enemies, and it has a 30.48 meter range, so about a 30.5 meter range, and a 6.1 meter sphere, so it affects enemies within 6.1 meters. It has a 2-minute recharge, and it does 11 physical damage every second for 5 seconds. It ignores shields, and it holds targets for 5 seconds. So definitely, if you're looking for a lot of science abilities, this may be for your ground character. This may be one you want to consider. Alright, now back to our character. For our kit modules, we can see our science one right here since this is a science character. And we have Anti-Time Entanglement Field. This is similar to the Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity, so except it is for ground. So it is a shrinking AoE damage and slow field. So it shrinks, but it slows down your enemies, and it does physical damage with half shield penetration each second. And it starts at 12 meters, continuously shrinks, slows down their run speed or slows them down, and has a 17.1 second recharge. So it can be shot off quite often. But definitely something to consider if you're looking for a lot of science abilities on a science character. And for our other characters, we have, for our engineers, we have a photonic barrier generator, and this gives, the photonic barrier generator is an area damage resistance and temporary HP. So it creates a photonic barrier generator for 180 seconds, that's 3 minutes, and that grants temporary hit points for every 3 seconds and +9 all damage resistance rating. Okay, so this means your allies take less damage and are granted extra hit points while it's active. So quite a nice thing if you want to if you're an engineer and want to help yourself and your enemies to stay alive. And for our tactical guys, we have the Chronoton Micro Torpedo Spread. And this is launch a spread of Chronoton Micro Torpedoes. They home in on your target, and you end up to 6 additional foes within a cone. So it deals 50% chance for knockback, 4 feet, slows down your enemies, minus 66% run speed for 3 seconds, and has a 20-second recharge. And it also deals kinetic damage, slow, and knockback to your target. So there you go. Torpedoes on the ground. Who'd have thought? Alright, moving right along, right along. Alright, so now we have our space gear. So we have our console, which is the Chronoton Drive Actuator. This gives an extra 4 to weapon power settings, an extra 4 to shield power setting, gives us a small amount of control expertise, and a small amount to our maximum shield capacity, plus 7.5%. Okay, and it is part of the 3-piece set Defense Initiative Armaments. Alright, moving along, we have our primary weapon type for our cannons, and that is the Chronoton dual heavy cannons. Now, this is one of the energy types, or one of the energy weapons. You could also use the Chronoton beam array instead. And both of these have primary and secondary energy types. Primary being Chronoton, secondary being Polaron. I'm going to go ahead and look at the energy or the beam array, since that is probably going to be what most people are going to use. Alright, so we have for our Chronoton, we have, where is it? Okay, so we have that it deals anti-proton damage. It subtracts 10 weapon power to self when firing. The dual heavy cannons will of course subtract 12, as which is standard. It has a 2.5% chance to apply enhanced Chronoton stabilization to yourself for 60 seconds, which grants 5% flight run speed or flight speed and turn rate, and 3% shield resistance for 60 seconds. And these stacks, or these stack up to 5 times, which means a total of 25% flight speed and turn rate, and a total of 15% shield resistance for up to 60 seconds. It also instantly reduces recharge time of bridge officer abilities by 5%. So again, this could be something if you're looking for an alternative to Oxtabat. This could be part of, not the only piece, but part of a build that looks to mitigate the cooldown time of bridge officer abilities. Alright, and moving right along, of course the Polaron things have the same effects, and we have the Torpedo. The Torpedo has very similar. It gives a 33% chance to apply the enhanced Chronoton stabilization, and it instantly reduces recharge time. The stabilization instantly reduces recharge time of bridge officer abilities by 5 seconds. Okay, and let's look at the set bonuses for that set, which are frequency tuning, and that gives us plus 8.9 directed energy weapon damage. I'll be honest, that's not a whole lot, but it also gives us plus 5% crit severity. That's for the 2-piece set. The 3-piece set, Temporal Threading, it's a clickable ability, and it gives us weapons gain plus 25 armor penetration and plus 25% shield penetration for 15 seconds. Now that has a 2-minute recharge. I'm going to be honest, not the greatest thing in the world. Alright, so the question is, I honestly probably would not go for this 3-piece set. Moving right along. So we have our next thing, the space set. This is the deflectors, engines, shield, and warp core. Alright, so we have, for the deflector, we have some starship hull restoration, shield restoration, a small amount of exotic particle generator, and starship control expertise. Okay, and then we have we have our impulse engines. This gives us a small amount of flight speed, and it tells us combat impulse engines are faster while at low engine power. Okay, so if you tend to have your engine power at a lower rate, these are probably going to do you a little better. It also gives a moderate or small amount of flight turn rate. And it has remove one hazard debuff when healed by hull, healing bridge officer and captain abilities. So, for example, when you use engineering team or hazard emitters, anything that heals your hull, or Oxysif for another one, then this will remove one hazard debuff. Alright, it also grants +5 weapon power setting. Okay, and moving right along. Then we have our, and I'm going to scroll down a little more, we have our warp core, and this gives additional auxiliary power, and the bonus increases at low aux power. It also gives us a maximum 5 maximum aux power. This means that we can have our aux power maxed out at 130 instead of 125. It also gives us a maximum warp factor of 14.5 instead of the normal 9.97. Okay. Oh, there we go. And it adds 7.5% of our auxiliary power to our weapon power as bonus power. It also gives plus 35 Starship Warp Core efficiency, which improves power levels when they're low, and an extra 20% slipstream speed. It also has this lovely thing called Trajector Jump. Basically, this allows you to teleport 5 kilometers forward in your current facing, and yes, that does work in map when on enemy maps when you're doing things like ISA, ISE, HSE. When you're fighting enemies, it does work in those maps. Okay, and so there you go, and it gives an extra 4,755 stealth when you do it, which really amounts to nothing. Okay, and let's check out the Singularity Core, which is essentially the same thing. It gives anywhere from 5 to 15 aux power based on your Singularity charge level. It gives a maximum warp factor of 14.5, as we saw with the Warp Core, and reduces the cooldown time on Singularity power use by 10%. It also gives 20% slipstream speed, like the Warp Core does, and additionally it gives the 35 Starship Exotic Particle Generator. So that's a bit more EPG if you're looking for it, and since all captains can now use Romulan ships, if you need a little boost to your EPG, this might be something to consider. Alright, and it also gives a improved plasma shockwave, which gives a 20% chance to disable one system for 7.5 seconds on top of everything else that the plasma shockwave from the Singularity Core abilities already gives. It also has the Trajector Jump, just like the Warp Core. So there you go. And then moving right along to the final piece of the 4-piece set, and that is the shields. And this gives a small amount of drain expertise. It has a maximum shield capacity of 8,721.7 with a 10% bleed through. I'll be honest, the bleed through ones are not my favorite, but it does have a decent amount of shield regen every 6 seconds. And passive amount shield regeneration increases as your shields are damaged. So the more your shields are damaged, the more you're going to increase, the more it's going to regenerate your shields. So that's actually helpful. Up to 100% increase, meaning it can double or it can time and a half your increase. Okay, so basically another 250 on top of what you already have. And it reduces all energy damage to shields by 10%, which is, both of those are the unique abilities of this particular shield. And now we have our set bonuses. Since this character is using all four pieces, we'll take a look here. Now, I want to stress that this is not the current meta for science builds. I just particularly like the 4-piece set bonus, so I choose to keep it. I will discuss what the meta is as we go along. The meta right now is actually to have 2 pieces of this set and then other pieces from other things. Usually the 2 pieces are the warp core and the shields. Alright, so moving on. Our 2-piece set bonus is called Predictive Decay Algorithm. That is a passive ability, and it gives us plus 25% all damage for our damage over time and hazard effects. This means it gives you an extra 25% to your gravity well, to your subspace vortex, to your destabilizing resonance beam, to anything you have that is a damage over time effect or a hazard effect. And this does include the anti-time entanglement singularity ability. Alright, so this is a pretty big one for science builds, and that's why it is part of the meta. Okay, 3-piece set bonus, timeline expertise. This gives, with this, when you use engineering team, science team, or tactical team. So it is conditional, but it is not technically an active ability. It is passive, but it is conditional. So when you use engineering team, science team, or tactical team, it gives you plus 20 control expertise and plus 20 drain expertise for 10 seconds. Okay? So again, not entirely passive, but not active either. It is conditional on you using Eng team, science team, or tac team. Alright, and moving right along, our 4-piece set bonus, which I personally like for science builds, but again, it is not the current meta. Alright, so this is an active ability, has a 10-kilometer range with a 2-kilometer sphere, has a 2-minute recharge. It is called Temporal Fracture. It gives now this isn't the correct amount because I'm on the ground, but it gives a large amount of physical damage every second for 5.5 seconds. It has 100% shield penetration, and it has a nice hold for 5.5 seconds. It is affected by EPG and control expertise, which makes this a nasty one on science dedicated boats. I personally like it. It affects up to 4 targets, so it can be, like I said, it can be nasty against those 4 targets. I've seen targets that are completely full health die from just this. So it's something to consider if you're doing a science build, but again, it is not the current meta. I'm going to say that again, not the current meta, but it is something that I personally like. So it's nice to have as an extra, oh, I'm out of gravity well, I'm out of this, I'm out of everything else, shoot this off. Anyway, so I personally like it and still use it. But that is our temporal reputation. So again, a lot of nice things in here for science builds and science captains. If you are tending, or if you are leaning that way or want to go that way, definitely some nice things to consider in this reputations. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. And this is Teacher Kirby, and I'll see you next time.